Brad Reisinger has a background stemming from West Point and the Army Rangers to his current role as Division President of Lennar Multifamily Communities. He's also an active member of the Runstad Advisory Board. Hello, Brad. Thanks for coming on with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Hi, Brad. Pleasure meeting you.
You too, Diana.
Great. So, Brad, tell us about your background and how you connected with the UW Real Estate Department.
Yeah, so I guess for me, it's kind of a circuitous, is that the correct way of saying it, route. I started as a farm boy from Lewis County, and from Lewis County ended up at West Point back in New York and spent some time in the Army, did business school, and pretty defined path, but a lot of varying opportunities after business school. So from the consulting side, coming out of business school with Jones Lang LaSalle, doing everything from structuring military housing, privatization, fixed income bond deals, to looking at underutilized assets in Guam on behalf of the Air Force and figuring out what to do with it, to what to do with the flooded out VA hospital in New Orleans after Katrina. So a lot of different experiences there. Ultimately went to work for a developer who was focused on military housing privatization. Pinnacle Development, John Goodman's, Stan Harrelson's Pinnacle, based here in Seattle, but on the development arm. And from there ended up in London, working on a private rented sector fund that John Goodman was working on through via Goodman Real Estate, to Seattle to start market rate development work with John and George Petrie, and eventually at Alliance. And that's where the connection with MSRE kicked in. I needed an analyst and called the program, and they made a recommendation, and they hired Dave Knight, and he was the first of, I think, 5, maybe 6 guys now and gals that we've hired out of the program. I subsequently left to go to Lennar, which is where I'm at today. And but yeah, we continue to hire out of the program and have had a lot of success with our with the graduates.
We would love to learn more about your role at Lennar, Brad, and particularly the multifamily division.
Well, Diana, I'm the division president for Pacific Northwest for multifamily. Lennar also has a division president in Seattle and a division president in Portland for home building. And while we're both part of the corporate Lennar platform, we operate completely independent. In fact, we don't actually technically on an org chart cross paths until you get to the CEO of corporate Lennar. But that doesn't mean we don't work together on different opportunities. On the multifamily side, so I'm responsible for the Pacific Northwest. Currently, that means Seattle MSA, Portland MSA, as well as the Boise MSA. We're taking a look at some other markets. And then within the division, we're a fully vertically integrated company. So whether it's development, property management, construction, it's all run. We have on-site local team here in Seattle in all 3 of those functions. We do receive a lot of national support. So all of our back of house, from accounting through HR, legal, and our capital market support is all consolidated more on a regional and national level. But here in the division, on the ground, property management, construction, and development.
Great. We did hear that the transition to multifamily, or rather the development of the multifamily portion of Lennar, was very recent. Would you mind telling us a little bit about how this whole department got born, and just, I would be curious to know.
Yeah, I think it's actually an interesting story in that, Lennar, largest home builder in the U.S., them and D.R. Horton kind of neck to neck. Depending on the metric. Coming out of the recession, they recognized just the changing demographics, that people were pushing back or delaying first time home purchases, Generation Y, the millennials, largest generation ever, kind of more of a push for urbanization. And I think, corporate Lennar recognized that there was going to be a significant demand for apartments across the country. So they decided to shift into apartments, but they did not do it by going to the division presidents. I mentioned previously, division president for home building here in Seattle. They did not call him up and say, hey, we'd like you to go build apartments in downtown Seattle. They recognized it's really two completely different sectors within the housing development industry. And so they took the approach, instead of making strategic hires across the country in each market. I was fortunate enough to be hired in 2013 and start the division here. Multifamily, this whole kind of evolution into multifamily really started in earnest in 2011. So the company is just coming up, I think next week, in fact, coming up on our 10-year anniversary. And that's marked by Todd Farrell, who's the president of LMC, the day he was hired by Lennar.
So it must have been a huge upfront investment for Lennar. Tell us about how they put together the rest of that team and the collaboration protocols that you guys use. I think it's pretty interesting from what I've learned.
Yeah, no, it is. It was a huge upfront investment, and you can't, development takes a while to get paid for, right? So it was 3, 4, 5 years of this investment or cost on the books for Lennar before they saw any return from it. And so it really kind of dictated the strategy. So the initial strategy was more of a merchant build strategy. Here in Seattle, that meant we merchant built Atlas over in Issaquah, as well as the Whitaker in West Seattle. We also had a few other deals in our pipeline that we thought were going to be merchant builds at that point. But then around 2016, I guess going into 2017, that kind of upfront investment had been paid. Again, saw shifts in the market, and Lennar Multifamily Communities had since been rebranded LMC. LMC pivoted to more of a build-to-core model and started raising, technically not a fund, it's more of a club investment, but Lennar Multifamily Ventures. The first fund close was $2.3 billion of equity. It was an eight-year vehicle. And we ended up financing 7 different communities in the Pacific Northwest through that. Here we are now in 2021, and what we found is some of those merchant deals that we did initially, and continue to do a few of them for the past few years, those partners want more. So we're still pursuing some merchant opportunities. We also have the build to core vehicles, the funds. We're currently raising money on Fund 3. But then likewise, what we found a lot of those core investors from the initial funds. They liked what we were doing. They liked our real estate. They liked our process. They liked the collaboration protocols I'll talk about here in a second. But they wanted more control. They didn't want to be part of a club investment. So now we're doing side deals with some of those investors. In lieu of them coming into LMB3, we're doing deals with some of those investors where they may do 4 or 5 deals one-on-one with us. The collaboration protocols you asked about, Jeff, and I think it says a lot about Lennar. I look at a company like Lennar, a Fortune $30 billion company. I'm not certain where that puts us in the Fortune 500 these days. You would think it would be a very rigid ship, right? And tough to steer and not be nimble, but it's not. I mean, just like that decision back in 2010, 2011 to pivot and to jump into multifamily, to these decisions to pivot from merchant to build to core, to really respond to the market. It really says a lot about the company itself, of how entrepreneurial it is, and its long history of whether it's Rialto, Lennar SFR, LNR, 5 Point Communities, all these like side companies that Lennar has created. Within LMC, we wanted to make sure that we had a structure that would facilitate collaboration and provide a level of consistency across the country without having a playbook that told each division and each developer exactly what they had to do. So if you tour our various communities, I think you'll find that each community is unique. We don't have a brand name, an overarching brand name. We, design each community independently. What I develop here in the Pacific Northwest, I like to say leads the market, but I'm not worried about how it necessarily compares to what's being done in San Francisco or Austin, Texas, or Miami, Florida. So the collaboration protocols really facilitate that. They really set out, there are a few rigid rules in there, like you have to get investment committee approval, and here's the packet, the information that has to be submitted for that approval, and here's the timeline. But beyond that, and there's a few national standards, just so we have some consistency. But beyond that, it's really more about, hey, at this stage in the deal, you're tying up land, you're preparing your investment committee packet, you're in DDs or you're in CDs, you're transitioning to property management. At each one of these phases, here's who you should be talking to. Make sure you've coordinated this. Make sure you brought this person into the mix. And that's really what the collaboration protocols are about. It's less about telling somebody what to do. It's more about helping them know what they should be doing, right? We all say one of our biggest fears is not knowing what we don't know. If you're a new hire at LMC, it's great. So one of your classmates, Peter, who just joined us, the first thing I did with him was sat down with him and with a couple of his colleagues, and we sat down, we went through the collaboration protocols, and within a week, I believe he was pretty up to speed on, he doesn't know everything about our process, but he knows exactly where he can find it. And he's not worrying at night about, geez, I'm working on something. Is there somebody I should be talking to or something I should be factoring in? He can refer back to those protocols and it tells him exactly, who to talk to and who to collaborate with. So it's been really effective. And, for us, the investors, as we go on road shows to raise equity, that's been a massive selling point for us. That one, your product's not cookie cutter, that you don't have, the LMC mothership is in Charlotte, North Carolina. You don't have somebody in Charlotte, North Carolina trying to design what a community in Ballard should look like or feel like, or what the unit mix or the amenities should be. At the same time, though, there is a level of consistency across the country, so that when an investor is investing in a potential portfolio opportunity with us, they know that the same quality is in the communities they're looking at in Seattle as it is in Denver or Dallas or Chicago or New York. So that consistency is important. I think a lot of times you see a national platform development company like a Lennar, and I won't name any names, but they're more of a collection of fiefdoms. The team in the Pacific Northwest has their own process, and oftentimes their own investor relationships, especially in merchant builders, that they bring in, and they kind of do deals the way that they get the deals done. Here, it's our investors are investing in an entire platform, so we can't have a fiefdom. So the collaboration protocol allows for some consistency without being a rigid playbook per se.
Great. Well, that's the LMC. I wanted to learn more about you. You hinted at your military background.
Yeah.
How have you been able to translate that into corporate America and your work?
Yeah, it's the people ask me all the time about I have a son or I have a nephew or I have somebody who's interested in getting into real estate development. They're in college. What should they study and what should they do after college? And I always tell them, like, do something crazy. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. Go have an experience, right? Go experience life. And so for me, that was the Army. But it wasn't just to go experience life. It was also, they were willing to pay for my college in a pretty decent college at that, at West Point. So, it was at an industry event with Price and people that will be watching this. And it was funny. They were going around the room and each of us had to stand up and announce where we went to college. And somebody before me had announced he went to Annapolis and got a standing ovation. And so by the time it got to me, and I mentioned I went to West Point, it's like, before you stand up and give me a standing ovation, just know that you paid for my college and I paid you back by hanging out in Hawaii for 5 years. So that was my hardship duty, was to go hang out in Hawaii. And but no, seriously, to answer that question, the parallels, when I left the Army to go to business school at Northwestern. And when I was interviewing at Northwestern, a student was conducting the interview, and I could tell probably had doubt. And about how you translate for leadership from the military to corporate America. I was like, if at the end of the day, if you try to lead in the Army based on the rank that's on your collar, you're going to fail, right? Your soldiers have to obey your order, legal order, but they will only do exactly what you tell them. If they don't respect you, if you're not inspiring them, they will do exactly what you tell them to do. They won't do any more. They won't do any less. And we all know what happens. The best laid out battle plan as soon as you cross the line of departure, right? I mean, it's pretty much out the door. Same thing with what we do in daily life in corporate America, right? We can have the best intentions, and as soon as we have that first meeting with the city, and somebody comes in with something out of left field, right? You have to be able to adapt to it. And in the military, to be successful in the military, you really have to inspire, right? These soldiers, you really have to understand them. They come from all walks of life. They're America's best. Mothers and daughters have given their sons up. And as a 23-year-old, I spent 1 year after West Point at Fort Benning, Georgia, going through infantry school since I was an infantry officer, infantry school, airborne school, and then Ranger school. And then after that is when I actually received my first platoon. So as a 23-year-old, you're leading, these sons and daughters of America that come from all across the country, all walks of life, all races, all socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's, it's really it's an inspiring opportunity, for a young person to, have that type of experience working with these people and learning from them, and having that level of responsibility put in your hand. A guy from the 2nd Ranger Battalion down at JBLM reached out to me a few weeks ago, and he was interviewing for business school at Northwestern at Kellogg, and he was prepared to kind of take his interview down the path of trying to translate everything to corporate speak. I was like, man, don't be crazy. I'm like, who else at 23 years old? I mean, you're a 2nd Ranger Battalion guy, right? You're jumping into combat at 23 years old with, people that had already done 5 or 6 tours, and you were their leader. Like, that doesn't happen in corporate America. So, for me, that experience, hands down, guys on my team, some of the MSRE graduates, they probably get tired of me, tying things back to the military. But it really is. I mean, one of the biggest things, and I was just harping on this at a corporate meeting we had in Charlotte 2 weeks ago, it's commander's intent, right? That's of a 5-paragraph operations order in the Army: who, what, when, where, why. That last paragraph, why, is always the most important paragraph. And that really translates to, what we do day to day in corporate America too, is helping people understand why are we doing something, so that we can all work on it collectively together. And when things change, we kind of know how to change with it.
Great. So about the why, can you share with us maybe a favorite book, hobby, or charity? What's your why, and what are you passionate about?
Yeah. Well, I get maybe a segue there from that military speak. And this book's been out for a while now, but I think it's going to be a classic. Maybe it's probably not old enough to be a classic yet, but Grit by Angela Duckworth. And that book, resonated with me for a few reasons. One, I think her thesis, or her most of her work or studies were done at West Point. And it was interesting because at West Point, when they evaluate students, they evaluate them on a whole candidate score. And that's kind of, you hear a lot of debate about this now in media, but it's based on SAT, ACT, GPA, what they did in school. And that's their whole candidate score. She came up with something called the Grit score, which was completely different, right? And it's not about just blindly sticking with something, but having that perseverance. And what she found was there was really no correlation between the whole candidate score and the Grit score. So you could have these kids that had the highest whole candidate score, and everything about their resume said they should have been a complete success at West Point, wash out within the first 3 months and just not be able to stick with it, versus kids that had where there was correlation was the Grit score, who scored highest on the Grit score, making it through the process. And how does that tie in today? And I'm sorry, I'll go back. I mentioned West Point. She also studied the Rangers and the Seahawks. So 3 things I'm passionate about: West Point, Rangers, and Seahawks. So another reason I like that book. But then why is that book important today? I gave it to my whole team a few years ago over the holidays. And every time we have a new hire, I make sure they get it. You know, because I always tell them, look, these communities that we work on, these are 4 to 5 year long projects, right? Some of them, the Whitaker in West Seattle, we actually, I think that ended up being 2011 to 2019, an 8-year process, right? You got to have some grit to get through this, right? You got to care, you got to have passion. I always tell people, like, you know, there's going to be a single mother spending Christmas morning in one of these apartments, right? Like, let's make sure that the details are done right. Let's care about it, right? Let's make sure that everything's done right. If we do everything right, you know, everything else will take care of itself. And, you know, it's hard to have that mindset, I get, for 4 to 5 years when you're just grinding day after day on the same community, but you really got to have the grit to stick with it. So that's the book. Also talk of charity, and it kind of segues in, you know, Lennar has the Lennar Foundation. They great track record of giving back. You know, the company's based in Miami, so a lot of that give back has been in Miami. If you ever go down to University of Miami, you notice the medical schools named after the family, the Miller family. Lot of, I think, Miller family, the foundation has actually funded the construction of that hospital. So the company has always given back, and they always push us as a division to give back. My wife, Manu, has for a long time been involved with Mary's Place here in Seattle. And as we thought about as a team, what charity do we want to work with in Seattle? And just a lot of things about Mary's Place made sense for us. You know, I think just that proven track record of getting, you know, was women and now it's families off the street and keeping them off the street and helping them rehabilitate their lives really resonated with us. And as a housing developer, it makes sense for us to be involved with a charity that gives back. And, you know, my wife and I now chair the No Child Sleeps Outside campaign every year for Mary's Place. And Fawn Spady from Dick's I think she was the one that came up with the name No Child Sleeps Outside. And what just a powerful name for a campaign. And, you know, it's been a lot of fun to work, you know, with Mary's Place and various volunteers from Amazon and Starbucks and Microsoft, Expedia that step up to support Mary's Place. John and Judy Runstad are 2 major supporters of Mary's Place, so thank them for their contributions as well.
Well, Brad, it was so nice meeting you, and thank you so much for this informative, fun, and inspirational conversation. I'm sure a lot of people would be thrilled to connect with you. So if you're open for us to reach out to you on LinkedIn, I know MSRE student would love to chat with you and pick your brain on multifamily and some other projects. Are you open to?
Absolutely, anytime. Several of the students have found me, and I'm more than willing to always schedule a call. You know, the last year or so, they've been phone calls. You know, hopefully here soon we can start getting together back in person, but always happy to sit down and talk, you know, about my career and how it might be relevant to them, but more importantly, to hear their story. And that's what I want going into these conversations is, like, tell me your story and help me understand your path, where you're coming from, where you want to go after. And, you know, I can help you kind of think through maybe how to position that, and help give you some thoughts on, you know, things that you should think about as you consider where you want to fit in within this industry. So more than happy to. Probably the best way to reach me, and initially they can track me down via LinkedIn. That's fine. If you're not on LinkedIn, simple email is just bradreisinger@gmail.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your passion and experiences with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys. This is great. Thanks for pulling these together. I know it's been a crazy year, so I'm glad that, you know, this type of outreach with the program didn't just go by the wayside. And appreciate you guys, you know, kind of using some ingenuity and figuring out a new way to stay connected with between the alumni and the students.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys.